Well, I want to formally welcome you to my dissertation proposal. As Dr. Lowe said, very, very happy to be here today. Had some adversity over the last few years, especially with 4 different concussions in the last 2 years. So this is an awesome day, and I wouldn't be here without my committee, and especially my 2 chairs. Dr. Lowe, you've been with me since day 1, and you've invested a lot in me, and thank you so much for everything you've done and your belief, and the big reason why I'm here today. Dr. Corfield, thank you so much for taking me in and all the confidence that you instill in me and the patience and time, and I really appreciate our relationship. Dr. Rosser, thank you for your service on my committee and your input and for always being so student-centered. And Dr. Guadagnoli, I've had the blessing of working with you in other capacities. Very fortunate to work with you in this setting. So thank you for your input and for your service. I'm going to go through, starting with the background, and then touch on my literature review, and then discuss the theoretical and conceptual frameworks used for this study. Then my research question, the design, and data analysis and instrument. But first I want to start with a little story. When I was recruited to play softball in college, I was recruited as a pitcher. And I ultimately ended up choosing UNLV. And during the fall semester, my coach told me I was looking to be more of a 3rd or 4th string pitcher. And she wanted me to focus on my hitting and my outfield. Well, the problem was I didn't really have much experience with hitting or outfield. However, I made a choice, and I decided to be open to what could happen, and I dedicated myself to the techniques. And my first semester, I was honored to earn first team All-American honors as a hitter and outfielder, and I helped my team to postseason. And I ended up having a nice career here, but I never pitched 1 inning. And I think that this isn't possible if not for a certain mindset, a certain set of internal characteristics. And this is just one example in the athletic setting. I was also curious as to why some of my teammates were high performers and why some of them didn't seem to be reaching their potential. And even though I would have been considered a high performer, I still feel like I could have been even better if I would have had the right tools. I finished my career, and a year later, I started as a practitioner in athletics, and I'm an academic advisor for 4 different teams, and I coordinate a life skills program for over 430 student athletes. And this is a program that the NCAA asks every institution to facilitate. And in my last year, I actually got to teach the seminars, and I taught on mental skills development and athletic and academic performance, personal development, leadership, legacy. And while I received positive feedback from the student athletes on my evaluations, I don't really know if it was actually helping them during their higher education careers. And through the lens of this particular study, I don't know how they view their academic and athletic abilities. I don't know how invested they are in their own personal development. And I also don't know about their experiences on campus and their behaviors. This is a little bit as to why I'm passionate about this topic. Now, from a macro perspective, college athletics has continued to evolve tremendously. And we've seen this through various avenues. So academically, the NCAA has imposed the academic progress rate, which tracks retention and eligibility of student athletes, which keeps the coach accountable and helps them promote potentially an academic culture within their team. There have also been increases in athletic standards. We've seen conferences align based on athletic powers and resources. We've seen this tremendous infrastructure and resources committed to student athletes to help them excel at a higher level. So with these increased standards come increased pressures. And it starts from the top down. It starts with the institutional president and the athletic director who are expected to graduate student athletes and bring in revenue at the institutional level. Then the next line, you have your coaches who feel tremendous pressure to create and put winning teams together on the field and also graduate their student athletes. Academic support staff are in the day-to-day trenches, helping student athletes progress and move forward. And then at the very bottom, ultimately, you have the student athlete. And that's what this study is really about, is the student athlete and the pressures to perform and excel at a high level. Now, another thing that we need, as far as my study, my second rationale is that it's important to examine internal factors relative to performance. And the literature is rich with some examples, and these are just a few of external factors that are said to be associated with higher levels of success or lower levels of success. What I'm proposing is that we start to really examine internal factors among the student athlete, because this is what matters. This is what can be shifted and developed among students during their careers to potentially impact outcomes. Whereas external factors are really beyond their control, and pre-college factors are what they enter higher education with. My third rationale is that academic and athletic performance need to be studied together. The studies look at academic performance or athletic performance of student athletes. And this fails to see the student athlete and their full role and the intricacies of their role on campus as both a student and an athlete. Finally, academic performance is really well captured as far as how we measure it. Athletic performance, on the other hand, is still a little bit ambiguous, and so this particular instrument that will be within my dissertation will contribute to the literature by creating an inclusive metric as far as how we understand and evaluate student-athlete athletic performance. Additionally, student-athlete success is a term that the literature uses very widely. However, very few studies actually differentiate between different levels of performance. And that's another element of my study. It's not enough in my mind to just graduate with the minimum requirements or to get through your 4 years playing. Going back full circle to where I started, the pressures that are imposed to be great and performance matters. And so looking at internal factors to understand differences between high performers and those who still aren't reaching their potential. My literature review is organized in this fashion. I'm going to start with how we measure academic performance and then talk about factors that influence or contribute to performance. I'll do the same with athletic performance, and then I'll get into the theoretical and conceptual frameworks used as a lens for this study. Academic performance, as mentioned, is most commonly captured through graduation rates, and specifically the academic progress rate. The issue with this is that it's an outcome, and it doesn't paint the picture of what's happening during a student-athlete's career. There are other evaluations throughout the literature, such as measuring a student-athlete's identity or their level of motivation and associating that with performance. And then some studies use GPA as a single indicator to capture performance. In fact, this is one of the most commonly used factors aside from graduation. I've organized the different factors that contribute to or influence performance under these three themes. Pre-college factors, what students enter higher education with, such as GPA, is well studied, and GPA is a common predictor of student-athlete performance during their first year. External factors outside of student-athlete control are very robust, and one example is group membership. A student-athlete automatically becomes a part of a group when they're in higher education. And some student-athletes, particularly males, perform better when primed with the terminology scholar-baller, versus female student-athletes who tend to perform at lower levels when primed with that same terminology. And then looking at internal factors that I perceive as controllable by the individual, these psychological traits and characteristics among student-athletes. Motivation is one factor that's looked at. For example, internalized academic motivation can increase when students receive positive feedback on exams or assignments. Non-cognitive factors have also been examined, such as how community service and a positive sense of self are found among more successful academic student-athletes. Now, athletic performance, as mentioned, is not as well captured. Some studies use a evaluation measure that resembles performance, so confidence levels of student-athletes. Some studies use sport-specific statistics to quantify athletic performance, like goals scored or assists. And then other studies use individual items, such as questions about students reaching their potential, or athletic awards, or postseason competition, to try to quantify performance. I've used the same organizational framework to capture the different factors among different levels of performers. Pre-college characteristics, for example, high school size can be predictive of starting status during the freshman year. External factors such as socialization. Student athletes, for example, who think they have more to gain from investing in their athletic endeavors will commit themselves there, and we will see greater performance. Those who enjoy being celebrated and those who enjoy being in the limelight will tend to devote their attention to athletic performance. Internal factors have also been examined. Sport-specific traits such as ability to cope with adversity is a main factor found among higher levels of performers. And then personal qualities such as neuroticism and conscientiousness, which are two of the big 5 personality factors found to be among more successful student athletes.
Really? I didn't know that.
They're neurotic and conscious.
Like neurotic athletes, that's great. I'm sorry. That was just, I saw some of that and that's great. Very good.
The issue that we're seeing is that there's a lot of attention devoted to external factors and pre-college characteristics. And so leading into my purpose, the purpose of this study is to examine differences in internal factors among Division I student athletes' levels of academic performance and athletic performance. I'm going to get into my frameworks at this point, and the first one is a theoretical framework by Dr. Carol Dweck called Mindset. And Dr. Dweck has established that we have one of two mindsets. We have a growth mindset, which is a belief that our abilities are malleable and can be developed, and a fixed mindset, where you tend to gravitate towards low-effort successes and attempt to validate your abilities. There are many positive aspects of having a growth mindset, particularly in the academic realm and in the K-12 setting, which is where Dr. Dweck primarily focuses her research. Mindset is also an established training model, in that you can move students from a fixed mindset to a growth mindset. And those who tend to gravitate towards a growth mindset, you can solidify those beliefs through this training that Dr. Dweck established in the K-12 setting. Now, the great thing about mindset is that it's not domain specific. And so you can have a growth mindset towards your academic abilities, but a fixed mindset, for example, towards your personality traits. And the literature has demonstrated many positive aspects of having a growth mindset, including increased self-efficacy and performance in physical activities, which is why, in addition to looking at academic mindset, it's important to look at athletic mindset as well. And this particular framework has not been used with this population. The second theoretical framework is personal growth initiative. This is established by Dr. Robitschek, and this is the active and intentional engagement and pursuit of your own growth and development. And this comes with a lot of positive elements as well. So having higher levels of personal growth initiative has led to some of these particular benefits. Like mindset, an intentional growth training program has been established and tested with college students to help them move from lower levels of personal growth initiative to higher levels of personal growth initiative. This particular construct, like mindset, has also not been used with this population. And the third conceptual framework is student-athlete experiences. Now, student-athlete experiences is well studied in the literature. And there's a tremendous amount of research devoted to capturing the experiences of student-athletes. You have the same participants who are describing how their experiences leads to either positive gains or negative outcomes. And these are some examples of what is reported. From here, Cox and his colleagues created the student-athlete experience inventory to try to quantify student-athlete experiences on campus, including their academic, social, and everyday experiences. Higher numbers of experiences have led to greater academic and practical gains. So In summary, there's 3 frameworks that are of the internal factors category: a psychological framework, a developmental framework, and a behavior-based framework. My research question is, how do academic and athletic performers of various ability levels differ on academic mindset, athletic mindset, personal growth initiative, and academic, social, and everyday experiences? And the appropriate analysis for this research question is the 2-factor multivariate analysis of variance. And the 2-factor MANOVA can help us examine differences between groups based on several dependent variables. So as a visual, I want to understand differences in responses to these 6 parametric dependent variables based on how student athletes are classified in this performance matrix. We have 2 continuous variables, academic performance and athletic performance, in terms of how we quantify them for this study. And they'll be turned into blocking variables so that our student athletes can fit into one of these 4 categories: high academic, high athletic performance; low academic, high athletic performance; low athletic, high academic performance; and low academic, low athletic performance. My expectations entering into this study are that student athletes who have higher performances will also have a growth mindset towards their academic and athletic abilities. They'll have higher levels of personal growth initiative, and they'll have higher number of experiences. Getting into my sample, I am looking at NCAA Division I FBS student athletes. So FBS football subdivision, they're institutions that participate in bowl games. And this particular population is identified because this is the highest level of collegiate sport in higher education. And so going back to those pressures and expectations, this group certainly feels that. This is also the group that I intend to work with in a professional setting. My goal is to have 100 participants from 6 different institutions, which is an overshot of what we actually need, but this will help ensure that we get the data that we need for this particular study. I've selected 6 different institutions, 3 from the Power 5 conference and 3 from the Group of 5 conference. The Power 5 conference is your elite conferences that have that athletic prowess and resources such as the SEC, the ACC, the Big 10, the Big 12, and the Pac-12. And then 3 institutions from the Group of 5 conferences, including the Mountain West Conference. And the purpose of selecting from both conferences is that I want this study to be generalizable and representative. When the NCAA imposes policy or scholarships or resources programs, they address the Division I student-athlete population as a whole. And so that's also what this study intends to accomplish. The sampling method I'll use is non-probability convenience sampling from these specific regions. And this was intentional because I'm selecting schools where, 1, I have a previous established relationship with the athletic administrators at that institution, and or 2, those athletic administrators are actively involved and engaged in research benefiting student athletes academically and personally. Participants for this study are juniors, seniors, and postgraduates. And this was intentional as well because performance is really solidified in these later years. For example, if I try to quantify a freshman student athlete's performance going into this fall, I most likely wouldn't have a cumulative GPA for them unless they took summer school. And if they're a spring sport, they haven't competed yet. Additionally, it would be unfair to try to compare the experiences, for example, of juniors than the experiences of freshmen, because freshmen simply haven't had the same opportunities. Postgraduates are included because a lot of student athletes redshirt, and so a lot of them finish their bachelor's degree but still have a year or potentially 2 years of eligibility. And so wanted to include this population as well. As far as my data collection process, I need to start at the top with athletic directors and associate athletic directors of academic units and obtain consent to use their student athletes as participants in my study. Now, once consent is granted, I would work with leaders and coaches of the meetings that occur at the beginning of the semester, whether they be compliance related or academic related. I can even ask the life skills professionals to implement the survey as a part of their curriculum at the beginning of the semester. Student athletes would need to have access to a computer in order to access a video recording of me explaining the study and my background, trying to sell them, and let them know that this is really actively participating in some community service, which all student athletes gather on their particular campuses. There's also competitions among different schools based on community service, and I believe that by participating in my study, they're contributing to the potential knowledge now and the future as far as how we can affect student athletes. And from there, if they don't access the video recording, there will also be a transcript that they can read. They'll open the link to the informed consent, and if they consent, then they will have access to the instrument, which is the final portion of this presentation. I will collect demographic data, and this is the demographic data most commonly used by the NCAA in their studies. Academic performance will be measured with cumulative GPA, as mentioned, the most common undergraduate evaluator. And this also represents, for example, we don't need to ask about scholarships because scholarships depend on cumulative GPA. So by having cumulative GPA, we will know a lot about performance. We'll take the scores and split them into 3 parts. And the upper part will be considered high performance, and the lower part will be considered low performance, and we won't use the middle data. Athletic performance is measured a little bit differently. I've taken the 5 most commonly used questions in the literature: postseason, potential, scholarships, playing time, and athletic awards. And I put a survey together, vetted first by Dr. Lowe and Dr. Guadagnoli. Then I've identified 12 other scholars in addition to Dr. Lowe and Dr. Guadagnoli to help me create this instrument. And so these scholars will receive the survey and they'll be able to rate each question based on importance and then also provide feedback on the different items. After the first round comes back, I'll create a new survey and then I'll send out the second draft, receive additional feedback, and then from there, I'll have considered the survey vetted, and that will be with the instrument used to quantify athletic performance. Personal, academic and athletic mindset are each measured on 8-item scales on a 6-point Likert scale. 4 of the 8 items are reverse scored in order to obtain a mean score, and student athletes fall across this spectrum of a growth and fixed mindset. Now, if possible, we wouldn't use the middle data because Dr. Dweck considers these beliefs to be ambiguous. We didn't have reliability information on this particular instrument. Now, there was a lot of reliability information on the 3- and 6-item instruments used in the K-12 setting, but not for this particular instrument that's intended for adults. And so Dr. Corkill and I ran a study in the fall of 2015 with 100 student athletes, and we were able to obtain sufficient reliability evidence. And we saw that student athletes varied in their growth and fixed mindset, also helping us understand this would be a viable construct for my study.
Can I just ask a question on that?
Sure.
So what you're saying is that the pilot study confirmed the notion of just the extreme values rather than the middle area. Is that what you were saying there?
That is actually from her data in K-12.
Right, and then you did the pilot.
Yes.
And the pilot gave you reliabilities on the constructs, but did it also confirm that you don't use the middle ground too? Or did you not look at that?
We didn't look at that.
Okay, I was just
at that point in
curious.
time. What we were really most interested in was making sure that student athletes from a sample we had access to
Right.
would fall across that range.
Right.
So that we wouldn't end up, she's doing her dissertation and finds out that none of them have a growth mindset.
Right.
And she found them all across the range, so that
Okay.
that made us feel a little bit more confident that going forward, she hopefully wouldn't end up in a situation where you didn't have enough subjects to fill the cells of her design.
Okay, that makes sense. So you're not going to use the middle ground like her, like the previous scholar.
If possible.
Okay, I was just curious.
Yeah.
It's not a criticism, it's a comment. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. The Personal Growth Initiative is a 16-item instrument measured on a 6-point Likert scale with these 4 different categories of questions. Their scores are obtained for each subscale, and then I average the 4 subscales to obtain a score that helps us understand the differences between low and high personal growth initiative. And this particular instrument has also demonstrated validity and reliability evidence. And then finally, the StudentAthlete Experiences Inventory is a 39-item instrument that has 3 different categories quantifying academic, social, and everyday experiences. The sums are obtained from each of the subscales and divided by the number of items and multiplied by 10 to obtain a score between 10 and 40, which helps us understand differences in experiences between our participants. And this instrument also has predictive validity and reliability evidence. So in total, we have 78 questions plus the athletic performance items that will be added once the scholars have vetted my survey, which will be anywhere from 5 to 8 and could potentially be less if items are omitted. I've asked half a dozen students to fill out this particular survey because it differed from the pilot survey that we did, and it took on average 9.75 minutes, so just under 10 minutes. I would say we could allow for 15 minutes, but it should be able to be completed in 10 minutes. And I also was able to find out that it is permissible to enter student athletes in, for example, a raffle if they participate in the study, which could increase participation to potentially win, for example, an Amazon gift card. So this concludes the formal presentation, and this time I'd like to take questions.